Imagine uncovering a map so old, so cryptic, and so fiercely protected that 3 entire centuries passed before anyone realized what it truly revealed. Picture a piece of parchment stained by time, whispered about in forgotten diaries, and locked away by people who feared the secret drawn onto it. Tonight, we're stepping into that mystery, slowly, carefully, because the map they hid for 300 years finally makes sense. For centuries, historians, explorers, and quiet collectors whispered about a strange chart said to have been created during an age when new worlds were still being sketched into existence. It wasn't a standard navigation tool, nor a territorial outline meant for trade or conquest. Instead, it seemed to sit at the edges of recorded history, mentioned only in footnotes, old letters, and the margins of forgotten travel logs. The story begins in the early 1700s, a period when empires were expanding fast, competing not only for land but for knowledge, especially knowledge that could offer power. Cartographers of that era were more than mapmakers. They were guardians of secrets, documenting routes that could change the fate of nations. And among them was a small circle entrusted with information too dangerous, or too valuable, to share with the world. Somewhere within that circle, this mysterious map was born. What made it unusual wasn't just its symbols or its faded ink, but the way it didn't match anything known at the time. It showed coastlines that officially didn't exist, mountain ranges far beyond recorded boundaries, and markings that resembled both ancient languages and coded messages. People who studied it, or tried to, claimed it felt like a puzzle designed by someone who knew their work would be hidden for a very long time. Some believed it pointed toward a lost settlement. Others thought it was the result of a shipwreck survivor sketching out a memory no one else could verify. And then there were those who dismissed it as a hoax, crafted to mislead rival explorers. Yet even skeptics admitted that the craftsmanship was too precise for a prank. But what truly fueled the secrecy was a single rumor, that the map held evidence of something early explorers encountered but were forbidden to record openly. Something that could shift the narrative of discovery itself. This rumor kept the map locked away in private hands, passed quietly from collector to collector, surfacing only briefly before disappearing again. Over time, it became more legend than artifact. And like many legends, it lived in shadows until the right person paid attention. By the time modern researchers rediscovered it, technology had finally caught up with its mysteries. Suddenly, details that once seemed meaningless began aligning with geological data, satellite imagery, and newly unearthed records. After 3 centuries of silence, the map started revealing its purpose. And now, as we unpack its story piece by piece, you'll see why those who protected it may have feared what would happen once the truth finally surfaced. Before we dive deeper, a quick question for you. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy dark history stories like this, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your feedback in the comments. In the dim glow of a lamp flickering over the restored parchment, the map finally revealed itself as a story far older and far darker than anyone expected. A story you and I must walk through slowly, step by step, because every line etched into its surface carries the weight of someone's fear. And as we begin this journey, imagine the earliest owner of this strange artifact, a quiet navigator who likely never meant for the world to see what he had drawn, yet he recorded it anyway, perhaps out of duty, perhaps out of desperation, and as he moved his quill across the surface, he captured coastlines that seemed impossibly familiar and impossibly wrong at the same time, forcing modern experts to question how someone living 3 centuries ago could know these places with such uncanny accuracy. And when researchers examined the parchment with spectral imaging, they found faint layers beneath the visible ink, almost like hidden corrections made by a trembling hand, a hand that might have belonged to someone who realized too late that what he witnessed should not have been witnessed at all. And you can imagine him glancing over his shoulder, listening for footsteps, knowing that the empire he served would silence him if they discovered the truth he was sketching. Because the map didn't just record geography, it hinted at events and encounters that official history kept buried for generations. And as the main investigator explained in a hushed interview, the markings resembled navigation routes used by ships rumored to have vanished without explanation, their crews never found, their logs mysteriously incomplete, and the symbols scattered across the parchment looked disturbingly similar to warnings left by sailors who feared something watching them from fog-heavy waters, a presence no one wanted to name. Yet the deeper you trace each fading stroke, the clearer it becomes that this navigator wasn't charting land at all but documenting a survivor's path through terror. And modern parallels are chilling when you consider how people today still vanish along remote sea routes, prompting researchers to wonder whether the dangers he captured centuries ago are as ancient as the waters themselves. And as you picture him sealing the map away, perhaps trembling after realizing the magnitude of what he had preserved, you feel the tension between duty and fear. The same tension echoed in the whispers of experts who now study the map and admit that some patterns match geological anomalies that weren't officially discovered until satellites confirmed them, raising the question of how a lone navigator managed to record what modern equipment only recently detected. And as we move through the narrative carried in each smudge and cryptic curve, imagine the silence of the ship he traveled on, the creaking of wooden beams, the relentless chill of midnight air pressing against him as he tried to decide which truth to keep and which to erase, because the faint erased lines uncovered by modern analysis show he changed his mind multiple times, as if arguing with himself about whether certain details were too dangerous to include, a struggle that becomes painfully clear when you study the final strokes that frame a region scholars now call the Blind Expanse. A place that appears on no official records but aligns uncannily with testimonies from sailors across different centuries who reported seeing lights beneath the water, strange movements, and currents that seemed to pull ships off their intended path. And as you let that thought sink in, consider how the map's final owner before its rediscovery, a collector known for hoarding suppressed artifacts, kept it locked in a humidity-controlled vault, claiming he did so because the world wasn't ready for the truth it held, a statement people dismissed as eccentric at the time but now feels eerily accurate as the evidence piles up. And if you lean closer to the parchment in your mind, you can almost sense the fear embedded in the strokes, the urgency of a man who wanted someone centuries later, someone like you, to finally understand why he risked everything to document what he saw. And as the story unfolds, you'll begin to notice that the map doesn't just guide explorers across forgotten terrain. It guides us into the mind of a witness who believed that the world would one day need to know that something out there was powerful enough to alter coastlines, erase ships, and force empires into silence. And now that the map has finally begun revealing its meaning, its first paragraph of history reads less like a chart and more like a warning whispered across 300 years, urging us to look closer, think deeper, and ask why the truth was hidden for so long. And as researchers continued unraveling the layers buried beneath centuries of dust, they found markings that resembled not just warnings but deliberate attempts to encode patterns of movement, as though the navigator had tracked something shifting beneath the waves, something that moved with intention rather than natural force. And experts today compare these patterns with modern sonar reports that occasionally capture unexplained formations rising from the ocean floor only to disappear moments later, creating a chilling parallel that suggests the navigator might have witnessed early signs of phenomena we still struggle to understand. And imagine him standing at the rail of his ship, lantern swaying in the wind, staring into waters darker than ink, convinced that something enormous lingered just beyond sight. And he pressed these fears into the parchment because he believed someone, someday, would encounter the same unsettling presence. And in that moment he wasn't documenting for his crew or his empire but for the unknown future, a future that includes us, reading his fears in the safety of modern light. And scholars analyzing the mathematical spacing between his symbols argue that the navigator encoded repeated cycles, almost like tracking the seasonal shifting of a massive hidden force. And while no one can say for certain what he saw, the consistency of his marks implies that he wasn't merely frightened. He was measuring something, observing a pattern that returned again and again in a slow rhythm too deliberate to dismiss. And when they compared his sketches with geological maps created centuries later, they discovered uncanny alignments with fault lines and trenches known for producing rare tidal disturbances, suggesting that whatever haunted him was rooted in forces far older than recorded history, forces that shape coastlines and swallow ships without leaving debris. And as you picture him capturing these cycles, imagine the weight on his conscience as he realized the truth he carried could destabilize the authority of the empire he served, an empire built on the belief that the world was charted, known, and orderly. And yet his discoveries defied that order, hinting at a reality too vast and too unsettling for his contemporaries to accept. That fear likely drove him to hide the map, folding it tightly, tucking it away, sealing it under layers of fabric and wax, hoping that one day someone brave enough or desperate enough would take the time to decipher what he had risked everything to preserve. And now, centuries later, as modern analysts compare satellite data, oceanic scans, and archaeological findings with the navigator's fragile lines, they admit in quiet conferences that the map's warnings may have been more accurate than anyone dared to believe, and that the world may still be shaped by the same unseen forces that terrified a lone navigator 300 years ago. And these final traces remind us that hidden truths often outlive empires, waiting patiently for recognition. As the map passed through the hands of the next silent guardian, its story grew heavier, layered with decades of secrecy and quiet dread, because every time someone touched it, they were confronted with questions that had no safe answers, and you can picture them: historians, collectors, scholars, huddled over the fragile parchment in candlelit rooms, their fingers hovering hesitantly above the delicate surface, aware that this wasn't just a historical artifact but a vessel of warnings, of knowledge too dangerous to release. And as the centuries marched on, those who held it began to note subtle changes, whether in their own perception or in the ink itself, almost as though the map lived, responding to the curiosity, fear, and obsession of those who tried to understand it. And while it remained mostly hidden, whispers of its existence circulated in tight circles of learned men and women, drawing the attention of explorers who had never intended to pursue myths, and yet were drawn irresistibly, as though the map had a gravitational pull all its own, leading them to forgotten libraries, dusty attics, and sealed archives, where the smell of mildew and old paper mixed with the electric tension of anticipation. And as you imagine them opening these doors, you can feel the air shift, heavy with the weight of something long buried, something that demanded attention yet threatened ruin to anyone who looked too closely. And researchers today describe that sensation as a kind of time-displaced terror, because the navigator's observations, once dismissed as eccentricities, now align with evidence gathered across oceans, continents, and decades of technological advancement, creating a bridge between past and present that no one could have anticipated. And the symbols etched in fading ink seem to pulse with significance when you study them under ultraviolet light, revealing hidden geometries, repeated motifs, and directional markers that point not to places on a map but to sequences of events, to movements of ships, currents, and something far more mysterious that may have remained unseen for centuries. And these discoveries force us to reconsider every voyage, every disappearance, every report of strange lights or unexplainable phenomena in oceans across the world. And the map, once hidden, becomes not just a record but a living narrative of danger, an encoded warning left by someone desperate to be heard. And as modern experts describe it, the navigator's hand seems to guide us through a dark and shifting labyrinth, one where history, geography, and fear converge in ways that make even the most seasoned historian pause and imagine him on deck, lantern swaying, waves slapping against the hull, jotting down every observation with trembling precision, knowing that what he records could either save or doom those who follow, because he had glimpsed things that no one else had. Things that seemed to belong neither to nature nor human invention, and the fact that the map survived it all is a testament to the meticulous care of those who understood its peril, who knew that losing it, misreading it, or exposing it prematurely could unleash consequences beyond comprehension. And as we peer into the narrative embedded in every curve, line, and symbol, we begin to see that these were not idle scribbles but conscious decisions, choices made to protect the unknown, to encode a secret so vast and incomprehensible that generations would pass before anyone could hope to decipher it. And yet, the human need to know, to uncover, to understand, ensures that the map would eventually emerge. And emerge it did, first into the hands of a scholar whose initial disbelief slowly turned to horror as patterns emerged, linking obscure maritime disasters across decades, linking disappearances that spanned oceans and centuries, linking the faint markings on parchment to the physical shifts of continents and underwater currents. And each revelation, each alignment, each connection added weight to the sense of urgency, of immediacy, as if the navigator had known that someday someone like us would need to connect the dots. And the parallels with modern technology are uncanny, with satellite imagery, deep-sea scanning, and historical records aligning with the old ink in ways that seem almost prophetic. And as you consider this, you can almost hear the whispered debates among experts, each one cautiously suggesting that what the navigator recorded might represent phenomena still active, still influencing shipping routes, still shaping the world in subtle but terrifying ways. And as we follow his invisible hand across the page, you realize that the map is a chronicle of fear, a testimony from someone who faced the unknown with courage, and that fear is tangible, almost palpable, as though it lingers in the fibers of the paper itself, refusing to fade with time, and the navigator's choices, the careful way he hid certain sections while emphasizing others, suggest a profound understanding not only of geography but of human psychology, of how people react to the inexplicable, and that understanding turns the map into more than a tool. It becomes a mirror, reflecting our own limitations, our own fears, and our own obsession with control, because for centuries, those who held it struggled with the knowledge it contained, and many chose ignorance, secrecy, or denial, while a few dared to study it, to probe its secrets, to map its implications, and in doing so, they experienced glimpses of the same dread that haunted the original navigator, a dread that whispers to anyone who seeks the truth, a warning encoded not just in ink but in intention, in method, in the subtle insistence that certain knowledge demands respect, that discovery carries responsibility. And as you imagine tracing the intricate paths, noting the repeated shapes, the marks of storms, the hints of vanished ships, the traces of something vast and unseen, you feel the same tension, the same need to understand, the same awareness that history has left gaps for a reason. Yet that very gap is what draws us in. And as modern experts correlate these observations with historical accounts of storms, mysterious disappearances, and unexplained phenomena, the narrative becomes clear. The navigator was not merely documenting the world, he was documenting an encounter, a pattern, a threat, and his meticulous preservation of the map across centuries ensures that we, too, feel the gravity of that threat, the immensity of the unknown, and the haunting echo of someone who faced it alone, and yet chose to leave behind a trail, a map that whispers across generations, urging caution, respect, and attention. And in those whispers, we hear the voice of a witness who trusted that time, eventually, would allow the truth to surface. And as we continue to study the parchment, the deeper layers of ink, the subtle corrections, the hidden symbols, we are drawn into a story of suspense, danger, and insight, a story that connects us directly with a navigator's mind 3 centuries ago, a story that bridges the past and present, a story that reminds us that some secrets are too potent to be ignored, too vast to be contained, and too essential to be left undiscovered. And in that recognition, we begin to understand why the map was hidden for so long, why it survived through centuries of fear, and why, finally, it has emerged for us to witness, to study, and to reflect upon, because it is not just a map, it is a living testament to the courage, insight, and enduring vigilance of someone who saw what no one else could and sought to warn the world, across centuries, with nothing but ink, parchment, and unwavering resolve to be. By the time the map reached its modern rediscoverers, the world had changed dramatically, but the urgency and mystery embedded in its lines had not, and you can almost feel the chill that accompanied those first careful examinations, the way the paper seemed to breathe under the light of magnifying lamps, revealing details that had eluded countless eyes over 3 centuries. And as these experts leaned closer, recording every nuance, they began to piece together what the navigator had truly attempted to communicate, a record not merely of geography but of a shadowed reality that had existed alongside human history, largely unnoticed yet immensely influential, shaping voyages, altering empires, and quietly guiding the outcomes of events that scholars had long thought disconnected. And as you imagine the tension in the room, the hushed exchanges, the debates over interpretation, you can feel the same mixture of excitement and dread that had surely gripped the original cartographer, who, centuries earlier, had labored in secrecy, knowing that revealing the truth could provoke disbelief, ridicule, or even punishment, because the navigator's discoveries, though grounded in meticulous observation, hinted at forces beyond human understanding, at phenomena that defied conventional explanation, and modern technology only amplified their significance, from satellite imagery that aligned eerily with his markings to oceanographic data that confirmed the existence of currents, trenches, and shifts in the sea floor that matched patterns he had encoded long before instruments existed to measure them. And as the story unfolded further, researchers noted how the navigator had anticipated dangers that would continue to affect travel and trade for generations, patterns that modern shipping records now corroborated, and the parallels between historical accounts of vanishing ships and the map's encoded warnings were chilling, each discovery layering new evidence onto a narrative that had been carefully hidden, preserved, and protected through centuries, as if time itself had been waiting for someone with enough patience and insight to recognize its meaning. and the navigator's foresight extended beyond natural phenomena, suggesting an acute awareness of human behavior, of greed, fear, and ambition, and how these traits often led people into perilous circumstances, echoing the disappearances, the mishaps, and the tragedies that he had chronicled in his subtle codes. And as you trace the lines, you begin to understand the profound intelligence and sensitivity required to encode not only spatial relationships but also patterns of human action, a dual record that speaks both to the land and to those who traverse it. And the map's preservation reflects a legacy of caution, of knowledge passed discreetly, of lives protected and lessons deferred until a time when the broader world could comprehend the scope of its warnings. And the rediscovery brought with it a mixture of fascination, fear, and a sense of responsibility, as those who first analyzed it realized that interpreting its full significance could influence modern navigation, policy, and understanding of historical events. And while some dismissed initial findings as coincidental, repeated analyses revealed startling alignments between the navigator's annotations and documented anomalies, from sudden tidal shifts to missing vessels, and even unexplained phenomena observed by contemporary crews in regions long thought mapped. And experts now speculate that the navigator's observations may represent an unprecedented record of natural and potentially unnatural forces, forces that have subtly shaped history without leaving conventional evidence. And as this realization sank in, the academic community, initially skeptical, began to recognize the map as not only a historical artifact but a warning, a guide, and a chronicle, a fusion of insight and prescience, a window into the mind of someone who had dared to observe what others ignored. And through his work, he left a template for understanding, a method for interpreting patterns that transcend generations. And as modern researchers worked, they discovered hidden layers in the parchment, small alterations, corrections, and overlaid symbols that suggested the navigator had repeatedly refined his record, adjusting for new knowledge, mistakes, or perhaps new phenomena he had observed. And this careful, iterative process reinforced the sense that he was documenting something dynamic, alive, and continually unfolding. And the implications were staggering, because if the map had been misread, ignored, or destroyed, centuries of understanding would have been lost, and the consequences, though unknowable, might have been severe, affecting both exploration and survival. And as you imagine handling the map, feeling its texture, noticing the subtle differences in ink and pressure, the invisible corrections visible only through advanced imaging, you sense the weight of centuries of vigilance, the responsibility borne by those who preserved it, and the courage it took to keep such knowledge secret until the world was ready. And perhaps the most haunting element of the map is its insistence on being read, interpreted, and respected, a silent demand that carries across time, challenging anyone who studies it to balance curiosity with caution, insight with prudence, and understanding with humility. And as you consider the map's final revelations, the interwoven stories of vanished sailors, shifting currents, and subtle warnings all converge to create a tapestry of suspense and human endurance. And through it, the navigator's voice resonates clearly, reminding us that the world is far more complex and mysterious than we often admit, and that survival, discovery, and comprehension require patience, observation, and respect for forces both known and unknown. And as the scholars debated, tested, and cross-referenced every detail, the map continued to yield secrets, tiny yet significant, hints of patterns repeating over centuries, hints of behavior, geography, and natural forces that demand careful attention. And the cumulative effect of these discoveries is a story of persistence, vigilance, and the enduring power of careful observation, of someone who risked ridicule and danger to record what others would not, of someone who understood that the passage of time could eventually vindicate his work. And as we absorb these lessons, tracing each line, imagining each decision, feeling each tension, we become participants in a narrative that bridges centuries, connecting us intimately to a witness of hidden truths. And the map's ability to communicate across generations is profound, because it does not merely depict a world that existed 300 years ago. It conveys the complexity, danger, and interconnectedness of forces that continue to shape our world. And through it, we gain perspective on the courage required to observe, record, and preserve, on the fear that accompanies knowledge, and on the enduring impact of one individual's careful, deliberate, and patient effort to make sense of an otherwise chaotic and perilous world. And as the story concludes, The map leaves us with a profound respect for those who come before, who struggled to understand the unknown, and whose legacy challenges us to do the same, reminding us that discovery is inseparable from responsibility, and that the hidden, the mysterious, and the frightening often carry the most vital lessons. And finally, as the rediscovery completes its arc, the navigator's intentions, fears, and insights emerge not just as history but as a continuous dialogue with the present, urging us to observe, reflect, and act with both caution and courage, because the map, once hidden for 300 years, now speaks with clarity, precision, and a haunting persistence, ensuring that those who study it feel the same awe, the same dread, and the same respect that have accompanied it across the centuries, a silent testament to the power of knowledge, secrecy, and the human drive to understand a world far larger and stranger than any single lifetime could contain. And in that realization, we are reminded that the past is never truly gone, that lessons endure, and that courage, vigilance, and insight remain our most vital tools as we navigate both history and the present. And in this understanding, the map, its navigator, and its long-hidden truths demand attention, reflection, and respect, connecting us across time to a witness who dared to see what others could not, and who left behind a legacy of meticulous, patient, and ultimately transformative knowledge that continues to challenge, fascinate, and warn us today, standing back from the map, after centuries of concealment, examination, and rediscovery. It's impossible not to feel the weight of the human lives intertwined with its story. The navigator who risked everything to record a truth too dangerous for his time, the collectors and scholars who safeguarded it across generations, and the modern researchers who finally pieced together its meaning, bridging 300 years of fear, curiosity, and determination. This map is more than ink on parchment. It is a vessel of history, a warning, a guide, and a reminder of the power of observation, courage, and patience. And as you consider the journey it has taken, from trembling hands in candlelit rooms to sophisticated labs with spectral imaging, you recognize that knowledge carries responsibility, that secrets bear consequences, and that even the smallest stroke of a pen can echo across centuries, shaping understanding in ways its creator could hardly have imagined. And perhaps the most haunting realization is that the world contains forces still beyond comprehension, forces that have quietly influenced our history, our oceans, and our survival. And the navigator understood that fully, committing his observations to a map that had to remain hidden until humanity could handle the truth. And now, as we study it, we feel both awe and humility, reminded that every discovery is a dialogue with the past, that curiosity and caution must coexist, and that the courage to witness, record, and preserve is itself a form of heroism. And in that awareness, we see the map not as a static object but as a living story, a conversation across time, a connection between generations of human experience, fear, and understanding. And if you allow yourself to absorb its lessons, you sense the importance of attentiveness, care, and respect for the mysteries that surround us, the ones we have uncovered and those we have yet to perceive. And perhaps most importantly, we recognize the responsibility each of us carries to engage with knowledge thoughtfully, with humility and care, and to honor the courage of those who came before, who labored in silence to preserve truths that might otherwise have been lost forever. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, like the video, and tell us in the comments what type of stories you'd like to see. And remember, some truths are hidden for a reason, but with patience, courage, and attention, even centuries-old secrets can finally speak to us, urging reflection, understanding, and respect for the vast, mysterious world around us.